So last time on this build, we did quite a lot of work on the headstock to get the new posh inlay sorted out, and I'm very, very happy with the way that that's come out. Bit of a departure for me using the 3D printer to make this logo. If you haven't seen that episode, it is well worth a watch. We also got the inside of this cavity lined out and nice and pretty because that is going to be on display, and I've got some posh fancy wiring to do in there at some point once I've got the stuff to do it with and I've got my head around how I'm going to do it. It's not going to be easy, but I want that to be kind of on display underneath the clear pit guard, and because of that it's going to have to look really, really nice. But that's all for the future, because by the end of this episode I want to get the back of this body all kind of prepped up and ready for finish. But before we do that, I've also got a couple of little jobs back up at the headstock end that I want to get sorted out before we go very much further. Because I mentioned right at the outset of this build that this is a really horrible cheap plastic nut, and I don't want that on. It's going to really negatively affect the playability of the guitar. And also this truss rod cover is just a little bit horrible, and I don't want to go with that either. So we need to do something about both of those things. First up, I've got a nice tusk nut that I'm going to put on here. This one's obviously been properly fitted and it's kind of looks to be about right. This one looks to be quite big, so it might be very tall in there and might need a little bit of thinning down just to make it fit properly. So before I go any further, I'm going to take my feeler gauges and I'm going to set up a stack of gauges that kind of fit into there, somewhere near level with that, which is about there. It doesn't have to be massively accurate, it's just so I can understand when I've got the new nut roughly to the right height. And to get rid of the old one, I'm going to start just running my scalpel through there, and also underneath a little bit, just down the side of that binding. There seems to be a little bit of a gap both underneath and on the binding, which is good. I'm just going to give that a few taps and it's already kind of come loose. There we are. Luckily that wasn't held on with too much glue, which is always nice. Sometimes they are absolutely lathered and you just simply have to break them to get them off. So with that done, we can now just trial fit our new nut. And we can see from that that we're about 1 millimetre too tall on that. Otherwise it's a pretty good fit, but it is just a little bit on the tall side. So I'll get this into a little vise and we'll just kind of take a little bit of this out with a file just to get it down where we want it. I'll just gently kind of take this down in stages, checking with the feeler gauges each time. Obviously we're still a little bit off there, so we'll get it back in the vise, take a bit more off. And I think there, after a little bit of backwards and forwards, we're kind of pretty much where we need to be. So give this a little bit of a clean up. It's got some fairly fine sandpaper there just to take any burrs off that edge we might have put in. And we can just put a couple of little dots of super glue on there. Just to hold it in place. And then there is a little bit of overlap on both sides now, so just get that turned over. give that a quick tickle. For me, it's really important that there's no kind of join that you can feel. It just makes it a much nicer playing experience, but that is all absolutely fine. So with that sorted out, next thing I want to do is just look at this truss rod cover situation. And as I say, that's not doing it for me. I think that looks horrible. I did consider using one of these kind of bell-shaped ones. I don't think that looks any better. Probably because it's bigger, it looks worse. So I think the actual size of that cover isn't too bad, but black plastic isn't really floating my boat. So what I thought was, I've got an offcut. It's exactly the same piece of rosewood that this came from. It's a little bit irregular, but we could clean that up, and it is easily big enough for what we need. So I think we remake this out of a bit of rosewood. And with that nicely smoothed off, I'm going to take my cut somewhere around here because that's kind of the most consistent in terms of thickness, and it's around about 2 mil thick, which I'm hoping will be enough that this won't move and warp and etc. So fire that over to the bandsaw, get it cut roughly to shape, trim it down on the disc sander, and we should be somewhere near. I think that's come out pretty nice. A little bit of sanding to do on there, but otherwise quite happy with that. So I'm not going to put a heavy chamfer on that. I'm probably just going to round these edges off a little bit, make them a little bit more kind of tactile. Now the next thing I need to do is figure out how I'm going to hold it in place. Now I could drill it and screw it, but this is very thin and I just feel that that would kind of split with the pressure of the screws going into it. Magnets would be a good call, but again, this is very, very thin and the smallest magnets I've got are about the same thickness, so I can't embed magnets into this. But I thought what I could do is I could take some very thin steel, in this case an old feeler gauge blade. I could attach this onto the back of here and then just embed some magnets into the headstock, and hopefully that would do it. It's a bit of a proof of concept. I don't know if it's going to work or not, but I'm going to give it a go. So I think first what I'll do is I'll cut a strip to go across the top, and I think this is kind of thin enough so that when it's in position you're not going to really see it. I'm hoping it's also thin enough, yeah, to just cut with some scissors. And just so that we know it actually works, I'm just going to hold it in place with some double-sided tape for now. We can always come back at this and stick it on with something a little bit more permanent, like epoxy, etc. This is actually quite good double-sided tape. And the problem I've always had with it is actually getting it off stuff, not getting it to stick, so I'm hopeful this will be all right. And seems to be working. So I'll get the guitar back on the bench. We'll get some of these stuck into the headstock. We'll see how we've done. I'll eyeball this centrally. It doesn't really matter, obviously, because this can kind of slide about to our heart's content. These little magnets are about 3mm in diameter. So I'm just going to put kind of one in there, one in there, and one in there. Put far too much super glue in there. Stick the magnet in. I think I could have made a lot less of a mess of that. That's got the worst of it off, and there. That seems to have worked pretty nicely. Comes off really easily, but not so easily that it's just going to fall off. And I think we can call that element done. Happy days. So with those couple of little jobs done, I now want to move on to the beginning of the finishing process for this. And I'm hoping it's going to be quite a straightforward job. I'm going to start with the back and the back of the neck, and I don't want to get any of the products that I'm going to be using onto this maple. It's only a very thin veneer, and my fear is that if I have to sand this kind of too heavily, I don't think I'd go through it, but it just gets very thin, and I think it just doesn't take a finish as well when it is that thin. So to help with that, I am going to just mask off all of the veneer for the time being. Don't have to be hugely precise with this, but I want to get it as nice as I can. So I'll just continue to get this masked up off camera and join you back in a second for the next step. And with that suitably mummified, the next step is to just kind of get that turned over, get it on some blocks, and just have a look and see what the back of this looks like. Now I have had a look at it and it is looking actually quite good. There's no dents or anything that need to be taken care of. So all I'm going to do is I've got a 240 grit pad on a block, and I'm just going to give that a going over. Just to make sure there's nothing in there that we don't want. Same on the sides. I'm not going to bore you with hours and hours of laborious sanding. suffice to say, I will spend quite a lot of time just making sure everything is right before we move on to the next stage. But I shall do that off camera. And that is probably about 35 minutes worth of sanding there, and it is all feeling really, really nice. I'll have to sand this all again once I've got the aqua coat on, which is our grain filler, because this is water based and it will tend to like lift the grain a little bit when I put it on. And my job here, basically, I don't need to do it on the maple on the front, because maple's got a really tight grain structure, so there isn't really any kind of porosity to fill. But this, whatever it is, you can see the pores in the wood, and I need to fill those before I spray it, otherwise the finish will just kind of sink straight into it, and I'll either have to use loads and loads of finish to fill that up, in which case it's going to take an absolute age to dry properly so I can polish it, or I'll end up with a not particularly very nice finish. So this grain filler is important. I've used this aqua coat now for a couple of years, and I'm really impressed with it. I know some people have had a different experience with it and don't really like it, but for me, the ease of use, the ease of cleanup, and kind of the ease of sanding down kind of all work in its favour. It doesn't smell, doesn't stain, and it's easy to apply and sand down. It's not particularly cheap, but you get what you pay for. And when I put it on, it tends to go on quite nicely on the kind of flat bits without too much build up that you're going to have to then rub down. But I tend to kind of spread it on, push it into the grain as much as possible, and then just give it a rub with a bit of kitchen roll or a shop towel or something, and just make sure it's pushed right in, and also you're smoothing it out as much as you can so you're not having to spend the rest of your life sanding. And there it is, with the first coat of grain filler on. I'm going to leave this now for a few hours to dry up. I might get away with one coat, I might not. I might have to repeat this once I've sanded it all down. There won't be much sanding because, as I say, I've kind of rubbed it on and then kind of rubbed all of the excess straight off again. But I'm hoping that that will be enough. If not, and it's a second coat, it's not a massive issue. It won't take very long at all. But obviously we've come to a stage now where we need to leave this to dry up before we can do anything with it, which means this is probably a really good time to leave this video. So I'll be back in a couple of days' time when we can get the rest of the prep work done and perhaps get some finish on. Until then, don't forget to hit the like button if you've enjoyed this, subscribe if you haven't already done so, and I'll look forward to seeing you then. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye bye.